Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of what I consider to be the best IEMs from Noble Audio. Noble Audio is a pretty respected brand. They have come out with a significant number of hits in the audio hobby. They turn up at Can Jam. They're usually surrounded by people. They have their fans. A lot of Summitify flagship IEM collectors and owners love them, respect them. They engage with the greater community. So they are a respected brand, guys. Now, I happen to be of somewhat of a contrarian opinion in that I happen to have a somewhat of a contrarian opinion in the sense that I still think that Noble Audio Sultans are the best IEMs from Noble Audio. Now, the reason why I think this is contrarian is that in general, when people consider Noble's best IEM, it's usually their current flagship, which is the Ragnar. The Ragnar, of course, has different versions. You have even a Viking Ragnar, which is supposed to be tuned slightly differently. And of course, the Ragnar, which is at a higher price point, which is at $4,000, it does give you more resolution. The Ragnar is absolutely resolving. It has a very spacious sound stage and has like relentlessly good imaging. However, I think in terms of this balance or harmony between tonality and technical performance, nothing can upend or surpass the Noble Audio Sultans. At least not from the Noble lineup, but that's just my subjective opinion. I will talk about unboxing, accessorization, then I'll talk about the frequency response, the tonality, and then I'll talk about technical performance. I'll leave you with parting thoughts in terms of how this compares with other IEMs from the Noble lineup and from, let's say, similarly priced stuff like the Fur Audio stuff and stuff from the Empire Ears lineup. Now, in terms of unboxing, this is a pretty impressive unboxing, which is nice because it is a $3,000 set of monitors, and you do expect some, level of, a luxury with unboxing, and it does provide that. It has a wooden box with the Noble Sultan branding here, the Sultan of Sound, and I'll just put this on the floor. And inside the wooden box, you get this nano case, which is essentially a hard Pelican case, and it's just like, a sort of a more turgid Pelican case. And the Pelican case opens up, and of course, you would have had the IEMs here. I've removed these IEMs. You would have had the cable here, the stock cable, which I've removed. And I'll talk about the cable and the shells in a bit. But you also get carrying cases, carrying pouches, this Noble branded cloth carrying pouch, this leather case for carrying the IEMs and the cable, extra set of tips, and a sufficient number of tips of different colors, foam tips as well. Some people complain about the treble, but I think it's source pairing and cable pairing that can make or break your experience with this IEM. I don't think nothing will break this experience of this IEM because I think it's a wonderful all-rounder. Even the first time I came across the Sultan, which is at a very early stage of my IEM hobby, because I was into headphones for most of my audio journey, and I found the Legend Evos from Empire Ears, and I liked how they played back rock and metal, and I thought nothing could surpass the Legend Evos for bass, and then I ran into this, and then I not only enjoyed the bass here, perhaps almost at the same level, and nowadays more than the Legend Evos, but then I started to enjoy the treble here more because it has a more present treble and the mid-range even. So it also has elastic bands and all that. So some people will remove this foam cutout, this foam insert, and carry multiple products inside. So it's a handy, a value for money container carrying case, the nano case, Noble branded, and I find it very, very satisfactory, and I do appreciate this from Noble, right? Okay, now unboxing out of the way, these IEMs have one 10M dynamic driver, 10mm dynamic driver, which is, pretty standard, but they do have pack-a-punch, which I'll talk about in the sound section. 4 Knowles BA drivers and 2 electrostatic super tweeters, E-stats essentially. They have a bespoke aluminum body with a hand-finished faceplate. The faceplate is very beautiful, but you can get different kinds of faceplates if you want it. You could get a faceplate that's more custom. The impedance is less than 35 ohms, and it's fairly easy to drive, guys. And the stock cable is a Noble Audio 8-core OCC copper cable. The stock cable is not the most premium looking, but it's surprisingly a stock cable that a lot of Noble Audio owners claim really works with the IEM in terms of sound. It has a very sweet rendition of treble. At the same time, it does untangle easily or relatively easily, as might be evident from this video. And it's light. It's lightweight, so that means like I have been able to take it on walks and stuff without any discomfort. So decent stock cable, guys. A lot of Noble Audio Sultan owners do not change the stock cable. Okay, we want to talk about frequency response, and I do want to make sure that you understand the frequency response does change according to the coupler you're using, your fit, because this IEM, while it doesn't have a finicky fit per se, they have slightly wider bores which can be fixed with the right ear tip. Of course, I recommend the spiral dot tips from JVC. So what you see now, first of all, I'll show you 3 different graphs that all of which look similar, or might even look the same on first blush, but are decidedly different. Okay, firstly, you have this from the lovely guys at headphones.com. Guys, I love. I think headphones.com guys in many ways have done more for the hobby than at most audio platforms. They have a marvelous blog. Andrew or Resolve played a huge part in the early stage of my hobby in directing me to the right stuff. And yeah, I mean, I've since then, of course, matured in terms of my exposure to the hobby. And by now, I think I've heard more stuff than most people. But that being said, I just want to disclaim how much I respect headphones.com, Taryn, the Lissimore brothers, Andrew, and of course, my close friend, Golden Sound. So this is by no means a diss. I just want to show you how graphs turn up differently. So this is the graph of the Noble Audio Sultan, and you'll see here that the treble peak at 7 kilohertz is at the same vertical line of 100 dB SPL as the sub bass, right? So this would suggest that this is significant in terms of its presence. Now, if you move on to, let's say, a different graph, let's say the clinical graph, this is interesting because while you still have the treble peak that you saw with the headphones.com graph, the headphones.com graph at 7 kilohertz, like I said, is the same level as the sub bass. However, you still get the 7 kilohertz peak, right? But it's at a much lower level than the sub bass. And when you look at frequency responses, it's essential that you don't isolate a certain band or a certain frequency and you harp or go on about how much, that is visible or audible, because ultimately the way this works is you sort of consume the response orally in its entirety. So the balance is important. So the balance here is decidedly towards sub bass, guys. This is the clinical graph, and I've talked about this on HeadFi post. If you look at the 75 dB horizontal line on the y-axis, you'll see that there's a significant drop in dB when it comes to the 7 kilohertz. So what I'm saying is, just don't go by graph and sort of come to the conclusion that this treble peak is going to finish your hearing, because it's by no means as bad as it looks. As a matter of fact, moving on, if I were to look at other graphs of the Noble Audio Sultan, I'll just show you what I mean. I also ran into a graph from Audio Discourse, which is even more different, because if you look at this, you don't see that sub bass sort of energy. As a matter of fact, you see more energy around, I want to say 30 hertz, and then a very gradual slide, which would suggest more mid bass, and a little more pin again than you perceive with the other graphs in relation to the sub bass, right? And then if you look at the blue line here, which is the left ear, you will see that this treble peak is by no means very protruding compared to the upper mid. So my point is, frequency response graphs are useful, but they cannot be a biblical window into the hobby. They cannot be a divine window into the hobby. They're not to be taken like a literal scripture. They don't give you a black and white presentation of the sound. They give you an overall shape of the sound, and these FR graphs vary from measurer to measurer. How you perceive the sound ultimately depends on your ear anatomy, your outer, your middle, and your inner ear anatomy. You could well not hear this treble lift either because of age or, more importantly, because of ear anatomy. Age is not the only factor. Your ear anatomy will make you more susceptible to certain frequencies over others. Your ear anatomy can also be such that these frequencies are not perceived at 7 hertz, or 7 kilohertz rather, but further up the frequency response. So you might actually perceive them as air frequencies, or even further up, and you might not even hear them. So with that out of the way, what does it sound like in terms of, the qualitative stuff, which I think is as important. So by way of disclaimer, guys, I like stuff that playback rock and metal well. That's my first qualifying criteria. But then my second qualifying criteria, without which I don't buy IEM, this is something I bought with my own money, I need my IEMs to play back vocals well, male and female. So I'm not just a metalhead who just goes for IEMs that are V-shaped. I do need my IEMs to have vocal performance be accurate, and my bar for vocal performance is not Sennheiser. It's not AG650, although it's lush and beautiful. It's likely ZMF. I also want to disclaim and say that I like headphones from Hyphaman, and I think they do vocals differently, but really well. Hyphaman vocals can be thinner, but I do think because the vocal performance of any track depends not just on how thick it is, so it's not just a function of lower mids or upper bass, but also air and some treble, because without that, I think vocals don't sound airy. So with that disclaimer out of the way, this I find to be a very strong competitor in this price point. Its bass is just fantastic. It's a rotund sub bass. I do think it's more sub bass oriented than mid bass oriented. But I don't find it lean in the mid bass because I do feel it has a very gradual glide from sub bass to mid bass. So it does have a very filled out, very round, very complete, very balanced sub bass to mid bass sort of performance. It doesn't have a whole lot of lower mids, but it does have pinna gain. And I think it's the right amount of pinna gain because on IEMs, guys, even if you're a Harman fanatic, do not perceive the Harman graph, which is based on only 20 listeners, which is a terribly small sample, which I've talked about in previous reviews. Do not perceive that to be, again, a biblical truth. Because a lot of people who are very experienced with IEMs, who listen to a lot of the best quality IEMs out there, will tell you that pinna gain is desirable, but only up to a point. Harman has a massive mountain for a pinna gain. This does not. This pinna gain is slightly gentler, and I think just right, because it's at the sweet spot when vocals don't sound recessed and they do not sound shouty and fatiguing, which is so critical with certain tracks. Moving on to the treble, I do think this has some treble energy around 6 to 8 kilohertz, which is critical because it allows for instruments to sound sparkly. It allows for voices to sound airy. It allows for the lead guitar to sound crunchy. And even for drums and percussions to sound more percussive in the sense that it sounds more defined. So cymbal crashes sound more defined, drum hits sound more defined, and the overall sense of punch and slam cannot be had in its entirety without that sort of treble performance. So it does make the Noble Audio Sultan's playback bass and drums extremely well, which I love. Air frequencies are there. On some graphs, it's more visible than on others, but I do think it's fairly airy. It's not the airiest thing on the market, but it's fairly airy. Now, I do like pairing it with my Sony W1ZM2, which some people will call warm, but what the Sony W1ZM2 does is that while it does in some ways seem to fill out sort of lower mids and give you an overall warmer presentation, what it does not do, it does not hide, conceal, restrain, pull back the treble. So if your IEMs have treble, you'll get that treble. But even with this DAP, which like I said, has decent treble performance, you're not going to get a trebly presentation with our friends the Sultans. So one track I was listening to in the morning is Audio Slave's Show Me How to Live. And sort of the grit, the melancholia, the grunginess in Chris Cornell's voice, the wistfulness was so well portrayed. So the mid-range does have an enormous ability to play out microdynamics really well, the inflections of his voice. So this is a nice segue, I think, to the discussion on technical performance. So its resolution is fine, but where I think it really stands out is its macro and micro dynamics. A very dynamic IEM, guys. So it punches hard, and it's not just for this track. Like when I was playing Numa from Tool, which is a well-loved track, some people will claim the best Tool track of all time. The bass sounds very visceral, very palpable. Numa also bears out how well this does soundstage. You get imaging that's pretty holographic, and it throws a wide stage. The width of the stage to some extent is driven by the Sony W1ZM2, which throws a wide stage in general. But all across the stuff that I played, guys, I'll just show you some of the stuff that I've played. I've played a bunch of Snoop Dogg, so the bass sounds wonderful. Some Metallica, some Danzig from yesteryears. I played some ballads from Def Leppard, a lot of Alice in Chains stuff. I really like grunge, the Seattle grunge scene. So this played back grunge really well, guys. And male vocals. I played a bunch of pop even. Played back everything well. Its technical performance can be summarized as follows. Decently resolving for the price. I do think there are IEMs at this price point that are slightly more resolving, like the Fur Audio KR5. Extremely dynamic and punchy. I do think there's one IEM that's more dynamic at this price point. That's the KR5 again, but the KR5 is ruthlessly dynamic. It's angry. It's just too visceral at some level. And with a lot of sources like the Hugo 2, the KR5 was unlistenable. It was just too bloody dynamic. The Empire Ears Legend Evo, it's a very dynamic IEM, but it lacks a bit of treble. It lacks a bit of treble incisiveness and sharpness. And it can be fatiguing because of the upper mids, which are more protruding than is the case here. So I do think this is better tuned than the Legend Evos. In terms of dynamics, I think it's in a class of its own. So dynamics are wonderful, both micro and macro. Micro dynamics are small, inflections in sound and small gradations in volume, which it does really well. Macro is essentially large swings in volume, which it does really well. The quieter to the larger, sort of, louder passage transition. Its timbre is just fine. It sounds very cohesive. It doesn't sound very E-staty or BA-ish or DD driver-ish. It sounds very, very coherent and cohesive, and almost like it's just one driver type playing music. I really love that about this IEM. So timbre is great. Technical performance is wonderful, both imaging and soundstage, and like I said, dynamics in particular. And tonality I've talked about is just really, really good. I think it plays back everything well, from metal to rock to vocals to alternative, etc. Now, are there any weaknesses to this IEM? Honestly speaking, there are no major weaknesses. I do think that you could get a lot of resolution at this sort of price point and even lower, because let's say you now have contenders like the Symphonium IEM, the Symphonium Helios, and the Crimson are just brutally resolving. However, they have a BA driver for bass, which I don't mind. I think the Symphonium guys have tuned their BA driver to sound very lifelike and very dynamic driver-ish, but at the same time, it is still a BA driver, and I think this will trump a Symphonium Helios at a lower price point, or a Crimson, easily when it comes to dynamics and punch and just sheer quality of the dynamic driver here. And for soundstage, and for imaging, and for macro dynamics. And like I said, I would take this over the Fur Audio KR5 and the Legend Evo because the KR5 is too aggressive and the Legend Evo is a bit too much of a one-trick pony with just a lot of bass. Guys, overall, I recommend this IEM. I do think this deserves more attention. There are people on HeadFi who also consider this to be their favorite IEM. It's not my favorite, but it is. I think it's the best IEM that Noble Audio has produced. So that's my subjective opinion. So that's that, guys. I hope this was useful. The Sultans are, worth considering if you are in the market for a $3,000 IEM that plays back metal well, rock well, and vocals well. That's it for me. I hope this review was useful. If it was, do watch my channel, subscribe, and like, and do all that. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye-bye.